We set? Yes. Yep. Okay, hello everybody and welcome. I'm sorry we're getting started a little bit late. We got chatting over coffee, is the truth, but that is just just as an indicator of, yeah, it's a good sign that this is going to be a really good seminar. I can tell you, I'm already excited about what we're going to hear. We are a hybrid seminar. And so we have people online. I hope you can hear us. Please keep yourselves on mute for now. And we have Jess on hand if there's any problems. So put things in the chat if there's a problem. I'm Kitty Stewart. I'm Professor of Social Policy and Associate Director of CASE. And I'm delighted to be chairing this seminar. We're going to be hearing from Moira Wallace, who is a former permanent secretary, who I think you were private secretary to Nigel Lawson and to John Major, looking back.
Very career.
A very varied career. So working right at the heart of government, including in delivery roles in criminal justice, in the Home Office and in the Department of Energy and Climate Change. And most pertinently for us here at CASE, in 1997, she became the first director of the Social Exclusion Unit set up by the government, exactly when we as CASE were set up. And she led that for 4 years, developing new strategies on social exclusion and absence, rough sleeping, teenage pregnancy, deprived neighbourhoods, among other things. And for the last few years, we've been really proud to have Moira here as a visiting professor of practice at CASE, where she has been researching what happened to some of these outcomes that she was working on during that period. And so today's, some of that work is available online, and today's seminar is going to be a deep dive into one of the aspects of that strategy, school absence. We're then going to hear from Anne Longfield, who has spent the last 3 decades working to improve the life chances of children. She's led a national children's charity for children. She worked on the delivery of the School Start programme in the number 10 strategy unit. She was the Children's Commissioner for England from 2015 to 2021. And she's now founder and executive chair of the Centre for Young Lives, which is an independent think tank and delivery unit dedicated to improving the lives of children, young people and families in the UK. So Anne is going to respond after we hear from Moira. So Moira, over to you.
Right, thank you very much. Nice to see so many people here and online. Now, I've been set a challenge by my colleagues who've seen how many slides I've got. I do not believe that I will get through them in the time I have set myself. So with your permission, I'm going to race through them so as to show them you do this. So what I'm planning to cover is 25 years of absence policy. I've only been involved in it initially and lastly as a researcher, but initially as a policymaker. So I've been drawing on some work I did in government and then research at LSE. And particularly, I'm going to focus on graphs. The fact that absence fell in the 2000s and in the early 2010s, and then it stalled, and obviously is sky high now. And I'm going to talk a little bit about what we might do now. The talk's in 4 bits, getting our bearings, just so we all know what we're talking about and how much school absence there is. And then I'm going to talk about effectively 2 political periods. First, the last Labour government, what they did, what the results looked like, and then the coalition and Conservatives, which I'm going to take as one, perhaps controversially. And then I'm going to talk about what perhaps we should do to tackle absence now. So let's start with some numbers. Sorry, this slide doesn't seem to show quite right here, but 1 in 5 pupils is a persistent absentee. So a persistent absentee is a pupil that misses 10% or more of their schooling. And these blue, grey, orange bars are all pupils, all schools in England. And the blue box is just over 0.5%, just over half of pupils who attend 95% of the time or more. Then there's a quarter who are between 90 and 95%. And then there's this fifth who are persistently absent. So that fifth of pupils, all kinds of schools, primary, secondary, special, are missing at least 10% of their schooling. Now, in this talk, I'm going to talk mainly about secondary absence. So the bottom half of this slide will tell you why. because persistent absence is much worse in secondary. So it's not 21%, it's 26% are missing 10% of their schooling. And then if you look at disadvantaged groups, it's worse still in secondary. So for pupils with special educational needs and disabilities in secondary, 39% of them are persistent absentees. And secondary pupils who are eligible for preschool meals, 45% of them are persistent absentees. So this is something that is approaching a norm for some people. All these figures are 22-23 because that's the data set that has been published and analysed in full. There are some more recent figures on a slightly different basis, which are not very different. Percentages. Try and imagine it's your caseload. How many actual people? So all schools, persistent absentees is just short of 1.6 million. That is more than the population of Estonia. So we have a whole country of persistent absentees. We could probably join NATO. Big numbers are a combination of big populations and high rates. So would you like to be in charge of school absence in Birmingham? 46,000 persistent absentees, or Liverpool, where there are 15,000, or Newcastle. But it's not all about deprivation. I put in Wokingham, which has one of the lowest persistent absence rates and one of the lowest deprivation rates. And still, as an actual number of pupils, it's quite high. I'm not suggesting that we focus on Wokingham. That's something about the scale. Why does it matter? I'm now going to sum up an extraordinarily subtle network of associations in one slide. Please don't shout at me. So this is an attempt to talk about the costs of absence in a very schematic way. I've arranged things almost by government department because I'm a former civil servant, I couldn't resist it. So absence is feeding into things like on the left, concerns for the DWP, top left, other concerns for Department for Education, middle, health. You may be surprised to see teenage conceptions there. Actually being absent from school is one of the top risk factors for being a teenage, having a teenage birth. On the top right, the Home Office and Justice, all these things that are connected with absence. On the right, homelessness, regional inequality. So we're starting to think about communities and local government. And underneath, people. What's it like to be the parent of a persistent absentee, or perhaps the parent of two? What's it like to be the sibling? What's it like to be the teacher, to be in the school, or to be in a community that has high levels of absence? And in orange, this has a very high cost to the taxpayer and to the economy. And no one's bothered to calculate it for years and years. So we don't know. No one's done one of those, the cost of school absence. Somebody did one in 2007, which seems like a long time ago. And at that time, looking at truant, so not necessarily all absentees, who were missing 5 weeks of school, they said it was 8.8 billion. Well, I would multiply that. This is several tens of billions, surely, allowing for the number of people who are absent and the passage of time. I think that would be a good thing for somebody to calculate. So we've talked about the scale, and we've talked about why it matters, all these outcomes, which of course are all connected with each other as well. They're not all driven by absence, but it's right in there in that nexus. So why does it happen? This looks like a wall from Only Connect, if any of you are given to playing that. And actually, rather tragically, you could try pressing some of these buttons and seeing whether they make the right noise. This is one of the things I feel most strongly about school absence is that so many people construct it far too simply in their heads. And actually, this requires both analytical and empathetic skills. There are millions of reasons, either singly or in combination, that cause people to miss school. On the left, this is my construction from, this is the one I want you to pin on your notice board, but it's my construction from lots of evidence. On the left, we start with all sorts of forms of illness, physical and mental, or maybe someone's unwell at home, or maybe someone's died, or maybe your household, your family is having terrible problems with any or all of poverty, hunger, conflict, mental health, drugs, alcohol, debt, housing. In this place of all places, I don't need to explain how common and how difficult that is. The second column is a set of things that can happen in education. People are behind. They have got special needs no one's meeting. They've got special needs, but no one will admit they have. They haven't settled. They don't feel like they belong in school. There's a subject, there's a teacher they hate. They feel discriminated against. They find school boring. They must miss Thursday's maths test. They want to leave. Or indeed, one form of absence, though it's quite a small one, is temporary exclusion. Third column is a set of really quite sinister things. Again, often quite common. Don't feel safe at school, being bullied, trying to avoid bullies. Their parent thinks it's too dangerous for them to go to school. All sorts of child protection issues. Or they're involved in gangs, or they're getting over or not getting over using drugs or alcohol. Top right. So the top right is a set of practical things, transport problems. That's a problem for many people. Some people have to get to one school from two homes. It's not easy. Problems with the morning routine. Maybe somebody is not home because they are working in the early morning or they've been working all night. Middle of the right-hand column is perhaps what people conventionally think of as truancy. You know, I've got something I'd rather do. Or maybe, you know, parents are really struggling to enforce it or afraid of school, or actually they have something else the child needs to do to work or to care. One child is sick, the other child stays home to look after them while the parent works. Or our big obsession in this country, it's a family holiday, which you'll see I have left at last, and I do not think is likely to be the most significant. These are incredibly common problems. Again, I'm standing in the centre of the analysis of social exclusion. I hardly need to say this. But, you know, it's not really surprising that over 20% of children are persistent absentees, because these problems are that prevalent. So 30% are in poverty, 22% of teenagers have a probable mental disorder. Look at the figures for food poverty. Safety, only 58% of secondary pupils feel safe in school. Bullying, around a third of pupils have experienced that. Illness, 1 in 10 children have had a parent or someone else being that they're close to seriously ill. So these are really common things. So which don't always, but can trigger school absence. I always think when you're looking at causes, it's interesting to look not at just the causes in the person who's suffering from the problem, but the causes in the system that's supposed to deal with it. And I have a little map of who might be trying to deal with this. Sorry, some of my titles have really fallen off the page. There are many, many players who could have an influence on school absence, but they're not always joined up. So loads and loads of institutions and bodies in yellow, schools, trusts, local authorities, housing, youth services, etc. And in the middle, the pupil, their parents and carers, peers and friends, siblings, and the wider community. Any one of these yellow rectangles, and probably more I haven't thought of, could have an influence, positive or negative, on child's attendance at school. And an awful lot of them are really struggling to exist. An awful lot of them have suffered major cuts. Many are struggling to recruit. Many have been through reorganisations. A lot of them no longer work on matching geographies. And that's particularly true with multi-academy trusts, which are often very geographically scattered. So this is quite a complicated delivery system to deal with a problem like school absence. This might seem like a gloomy page, so let's have a more cheerful one. Here's a graph. In a way, this is why I'm here. So this is secondary school absence, and you will see it has fallen. It was very, very high in the late 90s. You can see my report didn't do very much to it. It's only twitched slightly, but something got going in the 2000s, another little twitch, and kept going until the magic year of 2013-14. And this is overall absence, so the total amount of schooling lost in secondary schools. And it fell by 43% in 13 years, which actually kind of isn't enough. I'm not saying that was great when you got down to 5% of schooling being missed, but it was an awful lot better than 9% of schooling being missed. And I put a grey bar in for the pandemic because either there were no figures or they were so distorted they're hardly worth looking at. But that's where we are with secondary absence at the moment. So it's right back where we were at the start. So you could roll this up and turn it into a lampshade if you want. It would match nicely. Persistent absence. Our figures don't go back so far. We only got the data to be able to measure this with the arrival of the National Pupil Database. But that, again, is quite a steep trajectory of improvement. So it was, this is again secondary schools, a quarter of secondary school pupils were missing 10% of their schooling or more, and that came down to 13.6%. And again, stopped improving in 2013-14, and now is right back where it was then. I mean, my guess is if we had the data, this would have started at a much higher point much earlier, but nobody knows. So let's talk about what was happening at this time. So the first thing I would say is that Labour made it a priority. So it was very, very obvious already in the summer of 1997 that this was one of a number of things that the Blair government intended to do something about. That summer, Blair made a speech at the Aylesbury estate where he talked about a range of social problems where prevention was needed and a joined-up approach was needed. And in the autumn, he launched the Social Exclusion Unit, and I was fortunate enough to get to run it. And truancy, as he and we called it, and exclusion were one of three topics. I know there are two, but they were one of three topics. And that was the period when I worked on it. We were set the topic in, I think, November, and we published our report by May. And the report, it was the first report we ever published, and it talked about both truancy and exclusion, the causes. It advocated prevention. It talked a lot about the response. It was an era of paper registers, so people understandably found it quite hard to respond nimbly to people who weren't at school, because it often, it took them several days to realise that Maura Wallace had not turned up 3 days in a row. We talked about cross-agency work, and in a sign of things to come, we set a national target, which, by the way, initially we didn't meet. The way the Social Exclusion Unit worked was that it produced a set of recommendations, or set of policies. They were announced as agreed policies for cross-government implementation. And then the unit stepped back, and Department for Education and Skills, as it then was, led implementation. One of the things people were very sceptical about was they said, well, it's all right, all these clever people in the middle of, number 10 coming up with these ideas, but will implementation work? Well, I'd like to say implementation was better than the report. And DFES did a really good job, some excellent people there. And they, expanded on and developed and implemented the ideas in the report and came up with lots more from the front line. And I'd like to highlight a couple of programmes that I think were really important in this. They have very Blairite names: Excellence in Cities, Excellence in Cities. This was a lot of money going to deprived schools. It began in 1999, 24 local authorities. Every inner London borough was in there. I think it's a really interesting part of the London school improvement story. Who knew that getting children to actually be in school could be part of the story? By 2003, it covered a third of secondary schools in the country. And I would probably have bristled about the rationale of this programme, because it was talking about absence, exclusion and low attainment. And I thought, well, absence isn't really a behavioural, it's not the same thing as exclusion. But actually, the risk categories were often the same. The places that were suffering high levels of all of these were often the same. And actually improving the way those schools functioned for disadvantaged children was really what this was about. The successor programme to that had another very Blairite name, the Behaviour Improvement Programme. And it was based on very, very similar things, and again, rolled out to be virtually national. In the early days, the budgets of these programmes were over 100 million a year. And both were evaluated and were found to be successful in reducing absence, not eliminating it, but reducing it, and successful in other things as well. And I think those evaluations are worth having another look at. And one reason they're worth having a look at is that they're helping me in my one-woman campaign to overcome policy amnesia, because they actually tell us what people did. So the behaviour improvement programme, I think, I understand, operated as a menu of things that governments thought might work, and was developed in partnership with local authorities who could pick from the menu or add other things. So what did they order? I find this is fascinating. So 91% of local authorities chose to implement anti-bullying programmes. 71% ran initiatives to improve registration and attendance management. So there's sort of policing and responding bit of it. 2/3 experimented with an alternative curriculum. 2/3 introduced learning support units. 3/5 chose extended school. So getting the school to be part of the community, a resource for the community, getting parents and families in. Half of them introduced police in schools. I was a school governor at the time. We had a police officer in schools because a lot of children were too scared to come to school because of what happened either in school or the margins of school or on the way. And it was a win-win because the police were able to tackle the roots of some crime and help children go to school. 41% chose support for parents with children at risk. I love this quote on the right. Good Lord, evidence suggests the programme had a major effect on people's experience in school, leading them to want to attend. Dramatic. Shall we try it again? Actually, I'll just go back. What you don't see here is references to fines or parenting orders, but they existed and they were a much publicised element of the approach. There is some evaluation on them, which actually says as part of a broader approach, they can work. And there's actually some evaluation of parenting classes that say that people hated being told to go to them and really benefited from them. And there was one, well, I won't tell any more anecdotes, but actually a lot of parents said, I really resented someone telling me that I had to do this, but I got a lot of useful techniques out of it. However, fines were at an incredibly low level then compared with where they are now. And I will come back to that with some shocker statistics. I've talked a lot about absence, but you have to see this in part of a sort of national local picture. All these things were happening in schools and local areas, dealing with all the issues I've just been talking about. But it wasn't all left to them. There was a very important national and local element to it, which was making this a national effort, getting the money, helping people collaborate, providing lots of good practice, providing the data so people could see how they compared with others. CPD, professional development. By the end of that decade, there was a development program for senior leaders in behaviour and attendance, and thousands of people were doing it and coming away very positive and sometimes more than positive, saying this has changed my school. The government had to remove obstacles, provide flexibility, say, yeah, you know, actually we can change the national curriculum. You can become more vocational. You can disapply it for kids who otherwise won't come to school. And at the bottom, performance pressure. So this was performance managed. You know, there was someone in DFE who was the owner of this target and who had the Prime Minister's delivery unit encouraging and pressuring them to say, will you meet it? And have, you know, which are the areas in the schools that are going to stop you meeting this target? Lots of people don't like that approach, but actually, in my experience, that is the way to get government departments to actually focus on what's happening at local level. It's certainly the best way I have seen. This all happened in a much wider policy context. So I could sum it up with this thing on the top left. It was, if you look at what all these things were trying to do, it was trying to make schools work for all children in all places. And you saw this in the amount of money going into schools, real terms increases year after year, how it was distributed, recruitment of teachers and teaching assistants, the change in the curriculum at Key Stage 4. I could go on, educational maintenance allowance. We now have an education secretary who received the educational maintenance allowance. Actually, we stopped sending people the message that if you are below it, we expect you to leave at 16 and we will make it really hard for you to stay. We stopped doing that. Special educational needs was a massive increase in the proportion of children who were identified as having special educational needs. Floor targets. There were targets set nationally to say no school, no local authority should be doing less well than this. And on the right-hand side, a whole range of other social policies, benefits, parenting, Sure Start. I could go on. You could read it yourself. Plus, I won't make my bet of finishing on time if I read it all. These slides will be available afterwards, so you can stick them all up on your notice board if you want. Outcomes. Now, I can't prove that all the things I've just told you led to these outcomes, but it's a very striking graph. And it does show that absence can reduce. And I'd also like to say, I'll show you these graphs later. Actually, not only the overall indicator reduced, but the inequalities reduced. So the absence gap between children on free school meals and others narrowed. Ditto for special educational needs. So these absence gaps narrowed. Spoiler alert, they didn't stay narrow. There's also a really interesting regional pattern, and the longer research, there's a link to. There's a graph that shows that inner London went from being the worst area for school absence to being one of the best. Again, I think that's a really interesting contributor to London's performance. What do I think worked? I think there were effective policies that were targeted at the causes. So we know what the causes are. There were policies targeted at them. There are evaluations that say they were reasonably effective. I think the focus and the goals helped. I think having the right conditions for partnership helped. I can see the rest. So have I just told you about a positive story of one form of youth disadvantage that is the only positive story and nothing else changed? No. So this is vastly underappreciated, but lots of other forms of youth disadvantage look exactly the same when you draw the graph. So this is the proportion not attaining level 2 by age 16. And it's the same shape of graph, quite a dramatic fall from just over 50% to just over 30%, and then it kind of stops improving at a slightly different point. This is the school exclusion rate. Again, there are reasons why this shows a particular trajectory, but again, some quite steep falls, then it plateaus, then it goes up again. This is from some international survey evidence, but it is the England responses. This is about drunkenness, which is one possible contributor to school absence. Again, fell really dramatically. So 2002, over half of 15-year-olds had been drunk more than twice, and by 2014 it was, less than a third. These are big changes, internationally significant changes. And there's a very similar chart about drugs. So lots and lots of things were going in the same direction, show the same trajectory. And sorry, I must have missed one. There's teenage conceptions, slightly different, but still eventually quite a steep trajectory. And I've written a little more length about this elsewhere, but there are individual reasons in each of these cases, but the individual reasons in each case are always connected to all the others. I would say that, therefore, I'm giving you a talk about absence policy and also about youth policy. People always say we don't have a youth policy. Well, we always do, whether we call it that or not. And I think at this period, actually, we were seeing positive reinforcement. I want to come back to absence because I now need to tell you about the next decade. And I don't think this is fair. I think it's just a statement of truth that absence dropped down the priority list. Maybe not surprisingly, because you would have looked at those graphs at that time and thought, oh, this is on a good trend. I guess it'll keep falling. I can take my eye off this ball. This was a government that really didn't believe in targets for anything. Never mind this. Local partnerships went out of fashion. The government actually repealed a duty on local partners of schools to participate in local partnerships on attendance. If I was putting ticks here, I'd put a green tick beside a tighter definition of persistent absence. So the coalition said, actually, the definition had been missing 20% of schools, and they brought it down to 15 and then to 10. I think that was the right thing to do, but I don't think they had any way of improving it because prevention was incredibly squeezed. So all the institutions that and professionals that would have been doing prevention were all busy being reorganized, being cut, and we're not being encouraged to take this seriously. But we did have fines. Fines were a great response. And you can see here, I think this is one of the most unbelievable statistics I've come up with, that by 2018-19, fines were 13 times the level of 2009. And that was before the pandemic. They've gone up again. So in 2022-23, 398,000 penalty notices were issued for attendance. I would suggest that this is quite a large policy, and I don't think it's working. Absence also featured in the Troubled Families programme, which was an attempt at joined up solutions, but the evaluations of that say didn't seem to have any effect on absence, and it probably wasn't on the right scale. And here's a version of the policy context. We just looked at it under Labour, and it's sort of all going in the opposite direction. So per pupil spending was falling, distribution formula were becoming less pro-poor, huge organisational change of academisation. I mean, massive proportions of schools were going through a very big organisational change. Vocational options at GCSE were out the window to a large extent. I'm sure I don't need to tell you about the problems in special educational needs. All of these things actually created incentives to off-roll people. So schools thinking, you are persistently absent, I don't have resources to do anything about it, you are dragging my results down, I'm afraid you're going to have a fine. But if you actually decide you're going to home educate your children, then we can forget about all this, whether or not you are able to home educate your children. And I could go on. Local authorities are described in policy documents at the time as if they could solve this, but had no levers and no money. And I could go on, but I won't. Sometimes you see government documents that say that absence was on a declining trend from 2006-07 until recently. I'm not sure that's what this graph shows. I think this shows it was on a declining trend and then it stopped declining. And let's look at it a different way. So this is breaking down on the left. Blue line is pupils not eligible for free school meals. Orange is those who are. Actually, absence has been increasing since about 2013, and same on the right, same story for special educational needs. So absence has not been stable for the most disadvantaged. It's been rising for quite a long time before the pandemic. So what might we do about absence now? Quite a lot of people who are online, and maybe some in the room, that is actually your job and what you're wrestling with. So I'm sure you've got very high hopes for this section. Let's start with making it more difficult. The challenge is incredible. It's really great and much greater this time. So obviously the economy and public finances are in a different place. We have the legacy of the pandemic, which has changed health, changed attitudes, and just battered all the institutions that have to deal with this. We have much higher levels of mental ill health. We have the issue of social media, which is clearly playing a role in that. Local delivery, landscapes, chains, call them what you will, have been fragmented, as I just explained before. And we have an enormous problem in the special educational needs system, which is concerning on so many levels. However, the fundamental recipe will be the same. This is the same slide we looked at before. It will be things like the list on the left happening at local level, and they will need to be supported nationally and by local leaders with the stuff on the right, in my view. And it's early days for the government. We know some of the things on the left we're expecting them. We know that absence features in the opportunity mission. We know they plan to recruit more teachers. We know they plan to introduce breakfast clubs and little taste extended schools there. We know they're reviewing the curriculum. We know they're setting up Young Futures, which is trying to fill that gap for sport for vulnerable teenagers. But there's a lot more to do. And I would put on my list of things on the right a really comprehensive strategy, a lot more in prevention, resources are the right volume. And, you know, recently there's been a, great fanfare for 5 million being spent on this. Well, we need, we used 15 years ago, 20 years ago, we were spending 100 million a year. We need to be spending more on this. We need to recreate the conditions for partnership, help people demonstrate that partnership at national level, help people create partnerships at local level. And I think we need a guiding coalition that actually is bringing together all the different bodies that can help in explaining why this matters. So I've got 4 things that I thought to myself, what would you actually advise someone who was on the front line? They might think, "Oh, very nice, you sat in Whitehall, you draw me some grass, what should I actually be doing now?" So I offer these thoughts with somewhere between embarrassment, humility, and hope. I hope they might be useful. This is the same slide. This is connecting what we had before. Think causes. As I say, everyone constructs far too simple a story. It's a natural tendency to think of a couple of kinds of absence. Which causes are driving the problem? And I don't mean that it'll be one cause in one school or one area. It'll be all sorts of different things, different combinations of things for different pupils. Can they be prevented or at least mitigated? There was a really interesting talk on YouTube run by the Confederation of School Trusts where Peter Fonagy, who's a big noise in mental health, I think he's the national clinical lead, talked about school absence and talked about a programme he thought was very promising, which deals with pupils who have anxiety about school attendance, or who have anxiety about school attendance. And he said basically the way that he thought the programme was really quite successful on the basis of a small trial, it doesn't make the anxiety go away, but it increases self-efficacy and enables pupils to attend despite being anxious. That's what I mean by mitigation. So think causes. Think place. So this is the same picture. A lot of us in this room were very involved in neighbourhood policy under the last Labour government, because a lot of these things, they happen to people and they happen in places. Who in a place, what can the bus company do to prevent absence? Does anyone know what it's like to travel on the school bus, or actually not to have a school bus? What is the state of local drug and alcohol services? Is there an arts or a sports answer? Who can help? And to anyone who's feeling completely overpressed because they have 15,000 persistent absentees, I recognise this may not be the most positive answer. Nonetheless, I think it might be the answer. Who can help? Or it might be the most resourceful answer at the moment. Next, my third suggestion is to stop looking at the yellow blocks and look at the people in the middle. The pupils, the peers, the parents are the biggest, I've used the word army, but there is one pupil for every pupil. There's a parent or care, at least one for every pupil. There are siblings and so on. How do we actually engage young people, parents, their peers in solving this problem? And the answer at the moment is we refuse to listen to them in many cases. We have got a very good idea of what we think they should be doing, and when they don't turn up, we decide to shout at them. And a lot of pupils feel that. There's some really strong evidence on actually how pupils feel about school, and feelings of liking school, feelings of belonging have plummeted. And I think that data is telling us something. Same goes for parents. A lot of parents will be thinking they need help, not a lecture. And my fourth idea, I'm going to call this the teardrops. These are about teardrops. We spend a lot of time trying to turn absentees into presentees. We don't spend enough time on prevention. But what about these two at the right, educating people while they're absent or reintegrating them? Actually, there's been a revolution in online learning. Lots of us have done it ourselves. When someone can't attend school for insoluble reasons, are we good enough at using all the modern techniques to help them be educated, even if they can't be educated in school? You see stuff about robots, you see stuff about Oak Academy, you see all sorts of things. Are we making enough use of them? And are we thinking enough about reintegration There are lots and lots of research questions that occur when you talk about this. And one is how successful reintegration is. Great, you've stopped being absent. How well do we help you actually get back? So I'm about to stop. This is incredibly important. I believe it can be done. There's lots of evidence from our own past, not all RCTs, but a lot of it is you've paid for it as taxpayers. So I think it's worth our trying to get the value out of it. Huge amount has changed. It's not the same problem as it was in 1997 or 2007, but it's the same size as it was in 1997. So causes, I think causes. I'm going to stop there, Kitty. Did I?
You were absolutely spot on. Covered a huge house. Anne.
Amazing. I take it all back. Got there. And not only did you get there, it was so full of such rich content. So just a few thoughts from me, because there's going to be a really rich discussion, I think, in the room. But first of all, what a joy that was to be able to be reminded of the work of the SEU. And, you know, your slides about the early priority back in the Labour government then, and your talk of the report, which you managed to get out, I think, between September and May, and then the local areas and the choice and the targets and all of those things, you know, all underline the fact that this is something that you can do stuff about, but it doesn't, like so many things that I constantly bang on about, it's not going to happen of its own accord for a whole range of factors, partly because we are so far down those trajectories now. It's a bigger mountain to climb, but also because, you know, this is against a context where many of the agencies that need to be involved in, you know, tackling this have their own mountain to climb as well. So just a few thoughts here, and just some kind of contextual thoughts, three different groupings, and you know they're not dissimilar to yours, Moira, and then a kind of nuggets of hope. The first one, of course, is that I think, you know, really dispiriting I felt over recent years, this has all been something that's about truancy, about lazy parents, about, you know, greedy parents wanting to go on holidays that didn't care about, you know, their school and all of those things. And I think, you know, to get to this serious level of conversation, I'm pleased that the debate has largely moved on. And we're not just seeing this is something which you can turn a tap onto. I think the other part, of course, is that COVID has played its part in this. And I actually went to an international symposium with people from absolutely across the globe who said, you know, they could show the different rates of drop-off in kids that hadn't returned to school. In some countries, those children had gone to work because parents needed them to work. In others, just school had become something that had shut for so long that they had lost that engagement. And others, you know, there was this kind of disengagement and feeling, well, it didn't matter about going to school then, no one bothered about me, and now, you know, where do we go from here? So that's accelerated and rocket boosted something which already was a trend. And there is all that debate about the change in relationship between parents and school during that time. I mean, a 30-something said to me, I didn't realise it was an option not to go to school. And they honestly meant that. Not that they necessarily wouldn't have gone, but they thought that's what you did. And somewhere along that line during that period of time, that was broken. And parents as well have, you know, felt the impact of that. So the figures around children who are poor is something that we're looking at. We're doing a piece of work with Joseph Rowntree Foundation at the Centre for Young Lives, looking at the link between poverty and attendance, and that's very real. And when we look at those figures around free school meals, there was the figures in there, figure 39% of children in free school meals were persistently absent, 39%. And there's also a figure, the number of, when analysis is taking place in Bradford in one area, they found that of the children who are persistently absent, 56% were on free school meals. We should remember that actually there's as many children who are poor that aren't on free school meals that are. So, you know, a little bit of context there, but, you know, huge numbers. And And again, we're doing some work around the link around enrichment and school attendance and the like. So I think there is an amount of work around this, but you know, what you described and reminded us, Moira, was, you know, the engine that was built. And that's what I think we need to see in terms of, you know, how are we going to power up this engine to tackle it? And can we see, you know, can we make this a policy priority? Just quickly going through the different groupings, you know, the issue for families will say of the misery that they're all experiencing when children don't want to go into school or can't get into school. Families, not just poor families, but families where a child has kind of, you know, skipped along through school and then suddenly has such chronic anxiety they can't get there. Parents often will not be able to continue working, and in the same way will have to become experts in a system around, you know, special educational needs support, assessments, you know, all the rest of it to try to move towards their children being in school. The issues around poverty, as I was saying, very real. There's a quote in there from a family. The conversation only happened a couple of weeks ago with a family, probably about 4 miles from here. And they said, we can't, both our children can't go at once because they've only got one pair of shoes. They have to share share shoes. And, you know, that was just a reality. We know things like tooth decay, which we've also looked at, and the horrors of that mean that there's, again, another slice of children who will be suffering the pains of that or actually getting treatment around that. So for families, there is, you know, for a lot of families, I think, you know, a misery here, desperation, wanting people to help and be on their side, and desperate to get help to get their children into a better place. The children themselves, Moira, you said all of that, but I think at the centre of it, and one thing that I think is, you know, becoming the thing that everyone's talking around Whitehall is that sense of belonging. And what I always think of is those children who, you know, might not even be the noisy ones, but sit there thinking school's actually not for kids like me. You know, let's remember that a fifth of children do leave school without the basic levels of qualification at GCSEs. If you count up the kids who aren't in school, either through non-attendance, but also, you know, homeschooling, off-rolling, which still lives in a different way, in my view, managed moves, missing from school, you know, exclusion, the list goes on. That's a lot of children who mainstream school isn't or hasn't been providing a high quality education, aspirational education for. So I was delighted at party conferences when I heard the schools ministers, Catherine McGinnell, say we expect the vast majority of children to be in mainstream school. You'd think, but actually it's not been the case. And there was one point actually where I hit a bit of a low a few months ago looking at these figures and just thought, are we getting to the point where actually mainstream schools only for some children? You know, what would that percentage be? Would it be 60%? Would it be 70%? What's the tolerance level of that percent? Well, for me, it's probably about, you know, 90, high 90s, if you like, acknowledging that some children might need a different setting, but, you know, otherwise, that's what schools are for, you know, they're for all children. And that, I think that has slipped from mind in policy terms over that period of time, over until change government. So that issue about belonging and priority, really, really important. And there's something you said about scale as well, scale in terms of the numbers, but also scale in response. The Estonia figure, of course, is astounding. I went to a school in one of these cities with a very high number of children who were absent. And I went to a secondary school in an area of disadvantage, you know, extreme disadvantage. They said to me they had a school roll, say 1,400 children were on school. I think it's a little bit less than that. I said, how many children do you have that are persistently absent? They said 500. And then I said, does that include how many are severely absent, you know, not coming more than they're coming? And I kind of steel myself to hear and that was part of the 500, was 200. And they had 2 attendance officers. One of the posts they couldn't fill, and they've been advertising because, you know, they just couldn't attract people into it. You couldn't even keep the names up to date of the kids who weren't there on that. Obviously, lots of other things going on, but just a note on scale there. And then the schools themselves, that's part of it. We've had this rigid, as you know, brilliantly explained there, you know, that increasingly rigid kind of framework for schools that more and more children have felt didn't speak to them. We've got a curriculum review, which I think is all to play for in terms of broadening that, you know, a greater emphasis on inclusion. We know that if you work to get kids in school and also to stay in school, then that's something that really does work. And just again, another issue about kind of dosage, if you like, because resources are so scarce. A parent in Liverpool said her child hadn't got back into school. A sporty boy, 15, it always kind of loved life. COVID hit, it hadn't been back to school 2 years on. She said now she'd got early help. They were getting an hour a week with a youth worker who was brilliant, who was really being able to engage with them, looking at a pathway to return, starting going to the football club around the corner where I used to go, all those things. It was an hour a week. And she said, we know between us, it'll take at least half a day a week. I mean, personally, I would have liked much more than that. She was actually saying, I'm going to buy youth. You can buy youth workers. There's a private market for youth workers in the city who actually are providing that support. And, you know, she wasn't a parent with an affluent lifestyle at all, but she was, you know, that was something that she was considering. So all of those things, and I guess the other part of this is it is very real. Many of these things are symptoms, and the causes, obviously we need to alleviate the symptoms, but the causes are the things we need to tackle. So we've got the opportunity mission. Well, you know, this is absolutely mission critical to that, as is with the health mission, but the opportunity mission, I think, gives us the greatest gateway, really. Poverty reduction, poverty task force, poverty unit and the like, but really those issues around the scale, the priority and the engine we put behind it are the lessons we should take from Maura's brilliant presentation.
Thank you, Anne. Great. Okay, I'm sure we're going to have lots of questions. Shall we go online? Do we have questions online?